With us today, we have Jeff Andresen, our state climatologist, and Jeff is going to be talking about a weather outlook.
Thanks, Mike, and good morning. Since our last virtual breakfast, lots of changes have taken place. I think that's pretty obvious to everyone here, especially over the last day or so. But looking back here, I think it's important to really consider what has happened. Major upper air changed across North America, but with the formation of a big, broad upper air ridge across central and mostly central, but eastern North America as well. But it's led to a dramatic increase in temperatures, and that's where I really want to start here today. Over the last week, looking here on the right-hand side, these are temperature departures, and you can see for Michigan, virtually all of the state had warmer than normal mean temperatures during the last week, especially in southern and western parts of the state where mean temperatures were as much as 4 degrees Fahrenheit above the normal. And of course, that is in real contrast anyway to much of the spring so far, which was cooler and wetter than normal. And on the lower left here, I put in a time series of average daily temperatures. It's for Lansing since early April, but this really could be almost anywhere in Michigan or the Great Lakes region. But the numbers plotted here in blue, of course, are cooler than normal, and those in red, warmer than normal. And I guess what's important to note here is that most of and again, it's not a surprise to everyone, it's been a very, very challenging year for most everyone involved in agriculture because of the cool, wet conditions. But since about the beginning of the last week in July, with that upper air change, we have had the most the most lengthy warmer than normal spell that we've had really since, I have to go back into March, actually, before this chart, but you can see that here illustrated with this large red area. And in a nutshell, looking ahead and as a forecast, these conditions are going to continue at least for the next 1 to 2 weeks. It looks very, very likely. The other important piece of this, again, looking in the rearview mirror, is that while we did have heavy precipitation in some areas of the state, notably the southern tier of counties where we had in some cases more than 4 inches last weekend, but that was the exception rather than the rule, and much of the state trended drier than normal here, especially relative to where we have been during much of the spring season thus far. Many parts of the state received less than 1/4 of an inch of rain total here over the past week. And I guess one issue that is worth noting, doesn't jump out at you. We think about an unusually cool and wet spring, and it has been, obviously, by all measures, climatological, statistical, etc. But in those years, and where we have delayed planting and all sorts of problems with field work in the spring, we typically see, especially for our annual crops, the rooting systems with those crops, as they finally are able to develop, are shallower and less developed than they typically are in a given year, given all of the wet soils and the water up near the soil surface. And as a result of this, those crops are more susceptible to, basically periods of lack of water or running out of water more quickly. And we've begun to see some of that here across parts of the state, especially on coarse textured soils that do not hold as much plant available water. And it may seem a little surprising or ironic to be talking about a little bit of stress conditions or moisture stress in a season that's been so cool and wet, but this is unfortunately, also one of the risks that we have with such a type of spring like this. If it goes on long enough, that's when we hear the term flash drought that basically develops very, very quickly. Now, important to mention that is at least that is not in the forecast for now. But given right now warm temperatures, high solar radiation or sunshine loads, our potential evapotranspiration rates in many areas of the state are at, or even some cases exceeding, 0.2 of an inch per day. And because, again, of those relatively poorly developed rooting systems, the plants with all of the biomass above ground are just not able to keep up with the water demands. And so that we are seeing, reports in many parts of the state of stress, especially during the afternoon hours when that water need is the highest. So that said, let's move into forecast. This morning we have, well, we have a cool front here across the region. It's just exiting now the far southeastern corner of the state, and it's there's a big area of high pressure here behind, and that's really our major weather feature here for the next almost 2 days or more. We will see a chance, there's a little bit of an upper air disturbance here later this afternoon that might set off a few isolated showers, but that those will be few and far between, and the vast majority of the state will remain dry. It will be in most parts, with the exception of the southeast corner, where we'll probably still hit the mid to upper 80s for a high temperature today. It will be significantly and noticeably cooler than it was yesterday, with high temperatures ranging only from the upper 60s north to, in most areas, the upper 70s to near 80. So again, several degrees cooler than it was yesterday. As this cooler air moves in, it is somewhat temporary, and will set the stage for similar conditions here tomorrow. Here's the weather map for tomorrow morning. Another feature that we typically don't look well to our south for our forecast conditions here, but today is an exception, and the next couple of days are an exception. And let me just move back here to this morning's. There's an area of low pressure here in the northern Gulf of Mexico. And the reason I'm bringing this up is it's what is likely, very, very likely, going to become tropical storm and maybe Hurricane Barry, which is the second tropical storm or tropical feature in the Atlantic Basin here this year. As I move towards tomorrow morning, this system, it's moving over very warm water in the northern Gulf and is expected to intensify. And then finally, by Saturday morning, you can see it approaches what will probably be the coast of Louisiana or Texas, possibly, depending on how things shake out. But it will very, very likely intensify. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because these tropical systems carry just massive amounts of water vapor and moisture. One little glimpse of that yesterday at New Orleans, they had 9.42 inches of rain in a 6-hour period yesterday morning, which is just off the charts. And that rainfall was associated with the very, very northern fringe of this particular system. So while this particular storm may not have strong winds with it when it makes landfall, it probably will be a minimal hurricane. That's the best bet right now. It will have massive amounts of water, and that ultimately may play a role in our forecast, which brings me to further north up here to the Great Lakes. We do have, by late tomorrow night and on Saturday, we have a second cold frontal passage. It is relatively weak front, and there's very little moisture with it to work with, but this could set off a few more isolated showers, maybe a thunder shower, but similar to what we saw last night, the aerial coverage will be limited at best. Very, very probably, well, it's almost not even worth putting in the forecast, but there will be the possibility that occurs again. The biggest threat would be late tomorrow, Friday, into early the day on Saturday. High pressure then moves in behind that and sets the stage for a dry and gradually warmer weekend. And that's where we're moving here next in our forecast. By next week, with this upper air ridge really entrenched across the region, we will see a noticeable warm up, especially on the day on Sunday, and also an increase in humidity. And so we're looking at an extended period next work week, beginning Sunday, Monday, and then probably lasting for much of the week with much above normal temperatures and dew point temperatures back up into the mid and upper 60s. It's going to be hot, humid, and similar to what we saw the first week of July, that 4th of July week, almost a daily chance for, and we'll call it isolated or scattered showers or thunderstorms. So it's not out of the question, but it will be hit and miss, and the vast majority of areas probably will be missed by the precipitation, but it certainly is possible. There's one wild card to that, and again, that is Barry. What happens to the remnants of that? The two different major medium range forecast models that we look at, the United States forecast model has Barry, or what likely will become Barry, moving a little bit, for making landfall further to the east over Louisiana and moving up the lower Mississippi Valley, possibly making it into, well, certainly into the Ohio Valley. The European model that we look at on a regular basis, that has landfall occurring further to the west. And as a result of that, it gives us a better chance possibly to see remnants of Barry. If we do see, again, the remnants of this system, it likely would be the latter part of next week, maybe Thursday or Friday, but it could play a major role in our forecast, forecast for next week in terms of precipitation. In what is likely to be a drier than normal week here for the upcoming week, here's the precipitation forecast through next Thursday morning. Much of the state, as you can see, less than 1/4 of an inch total. So again, especially relative to where we've been much of the growing season, much, much drier. Exceptions, the far northern part of the state, the Upper Peninsula, where more than 1/2 an inch is forecast, and also look to our south. All of this very, very colorful area here, these are the remnants. This is all water remnants from Barry, and you can see that path of that all that moisture making it up the lower Mississippi and into the Ohio Valley. And again, probably if anybody's impacted by this in Michigan, it will be the southern part of the state, but it's possible. A lot could happen between now and then. It's still over a week out. We could see that move further north. We'll just have to keep an eye on that here next week. But right now, I think the best bet is that maybe the remnants of Barry brush the southern part of the state by late in the week. But other than that, mostly drier conditions this week. Now looking into the medium range here, the third week and into the beginning of the fourth week of the month, almost identical outlooks for both the 6 to 10 day and 8 to 14 day time frames. Here's the jet stream pattern forecast in this red stippled area here, this upper air ridge. This almost always results in warmer than normal mean temperatures underneath it and downstream to the east. That's what we'll be seeing. The storm track with this particular system will be right along the U.S.-Canadian border, and the closer you are to that, the better chances you will have for rainfall. But given that, overall, this pattern does suggest frequent chances for precipitation, and as a result of that, the outlook does call both for 6 to 10 day and 8 to 14 day time frame. It does call for above normal precipitation amounts. I think if I would have done this is the official outlook. If I would have done that personally, I probably would have backed off a little bit on the precip, but it should be probably at least normal, maybe above normal. There will be frequent chances for precipitation in this type of upper air flow. Again, beginning some point probably by late next week or the weekend following, and that follows again a dry week. The other, maybe the most important message here is at least for the next 1 to 2 weeks, we are looking at an extended period of above normal temperatures, and of course that means also above normal potential of evapotranspiration. It also will be an increase in our degree day units, and again, in a season where we've had so many delays and are so far behind in many cases, this is important. Certainly we need to get the heat and the growing degree day accumulations during the months, especially during the months of July and August. Those are climatologically our warmest months. And so right now, the forecast, at least in that regard, is looking more optimistic, but it is going to be warm. And so summarizing here, very, very summer-like forecast for the next upcoming week. Warmer than normal, but also drier than normal, maybe the exception of the Upper Peninsula here. Our temperatures will be increasing from seasonable levels here today and probably tomorrow to much above normal levels by next week. We could even call it, with the high dew point temperatures, we could probably almost call it some heat wave conditions. Don't be surprised to see heat advisories, especially during the middle, Tuesday and Wednesday of next week. And then we'll keep an eye on to the south to see where Barry, or what's again very likely to become Barry, where that goes. But if that does impact Michigan, most likely across southern sections of the state. And then finally on into our medium range, warmer and maybe a little bit wetter than normal. One last thing about that, last virtual breakfast in the weather outlook, we looked at the long lead outlooks. And for the month of July, you may remember officially it called for normal to below normal mean temperatures. Unless something dramatic happens now, given this outlook, that's almost, it will be, well, nothing's impossible, but it would be very, very, very difficult for that to happen. We are looking right now, I think what's likely, July will be warmer than normal. And again, given the delays and the problems with the start this year, that at least will give us some heat to move things along here. But water in some areas here, at least in the short term, may become a little bit of an issue especially for those young crops that do not have well-developed rooting systems yet. And with that, I'll finish up, wrap up. Anybody have any weather questions this morning?
What caused the whack-a-mole pop-up thunderstorms weather we experienced over the past 7 to 10 days in the southern tier? I've never seen that. Radar looked like a satellite video of a lightning storm, mainly in afternoons and evenings.
Well, it's a lot of it has to do with the conditions in the upper air and the general jet stream pattern that we had, very, very summer-like pattern with that upper ridge. And in general, being underneath that ridge is not conducive to produce showers and thunderstorms, which is our primary source of rainfall during the warm season. And as a result of that, well, we have sometimes extreme instability when we had the hot, humid conditions develop. And ultimately, even though the atmosphere is suppressing overall in a general sense over large areas, is acting to suppress convection, it just gives way, especially during the afternoon and early evening hours. And that's the general physical scheme behind these hit and miss popcorn type thunderstorms that show up. It's just it's a response for the atmosphere to intense heating in localized areas.
Thank you, Jeff. Excellent presentation.